"Just confirming your authorization," the bank manager said cheerfully through the phone, her voice carrying the routine professionalism of someone processing a standard transaction. "Whoever walked into that bank this morning with Michael's documentation wasn't my child. Someone had stolen my dead son's identity. And they'd just taken everything I had. Let me tell you about the thief who desecrated my son's memory and the mother who made them pay for every dollar and every tear." Michael was 24 when he died. An Army Ranger, deployed to Kandahar province on his third tour. The notification officers arrived at my door on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact shade of gray the sky was, the particular chill of the October wind, the way my coffee had gone cold in my hand while they spoke words I couldn't absorb. "Improvised explosive device. Immediate. No suffering." As if no suffering could make any of it acceptable. The 3 years since his death had been a slow reconstruction of meaning. I'd retired early from my nursing career, couldn't focus, couldn't heal others when my own wounds wouldn't close. My husband had died of cancer when Michael was in high school. My son had been everything that remained of the family I'd built. The $412,847 in my accounts represented a lifetime of savings, my husband's life insurance, Michael's death benefits, and the sale of our family home after I'd downsized to a small apartment I could manage alone. It was my security. My future. Everything I had. And now, apparently, it belonged to a ghost. I didn't stay on the floor for long. Grief had taught me that collapse was a luxury. You could break down, but eventually you had to get up, had to keep moving, had to force yourself through the next minute and the one after that. I called the bank back. Demanded to speak with the branch manager, then the regional security officer, then anyone who could explain how my dead son had walked into their building and walked out with my life savings. The documentation was impeccable, the security officer said, audibly shaken. Military ID, passport, birth certificate, all originals. He knew the account numbers, the security questions, personal details about you. "My son is buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Section 60, Row 14. His death certificate is filed with the Army, the VA, the Social Security Administration." How did no one check? "Ma'am, when someone has that level of documentation and knowledge, you let someone steal $400,000 using a dead soldier's identity. My son died for this country. Someone used his name to rob his own mother." The security officer had no response. Neither did I, really. Just rage and grief tangled together so tightly I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The police responded within the hour. Detective Samuel Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived at my apartment with a notepad and an expression of controlled urgency. He was older, gray at the temples, with the particular patience of someone who'd seen too many victims and understood that listening mattered more than rushing. "Walk me through everything," he said. "From the beginning." I told him about Michael's death. About the death benefits and insurance that had comprised most of my savings. About the accounts I'd maintained in both our names because changing them felt like erasing him, like admitting he was really gone. "The person who made the withdrawal had Michael's military ID?" Morrison asked. "That's what the bank said. Originals. His actual ID should have been returned to the Army when he was killed. Along with his other documents. It was. I received his personal effects. Everything was accounted for." Morrison made a note. "Then either someone created extremely sophisticated forgeries, or someone with access to military records helped them. The second possibility hadn't occurred to me. Someone inside the system might have facilitated this." The investigation expanded rapidly. The bank provided security footage from the morning of the withdrawal. I forced myself to watch it with Detective Morrison, forced myself to see the man who claimed to be my son. He was approximately Michael's age and build. Similar coloring, similar stance. But his face was wrong, the nose, the jawline, details a mother would notice even when others might not. "That's not my son." "You're certain?" "Detective, I changed that boy's diapers. I watched him graduate basic training. I identified his body at Dover Air Force Base." My voice cracked but held. "I know my child. That man is not Michael." Morrison nodded slowly. "The resemblance is intentional but imperfect. Someone chose him specifically because he could pass for Michael in documentation, but anyone who actually knew your son would see the difference. The bank staff didn't know him." "Exactly. They checked documents, not faces. That's the vulnerability he exploited." The forensic analysis of the documents provided the first real lead. The military ID was a sophisticated forgery, real materials, proper formatting, but subtle inconsistencies in the microprinting that genuine IDs didn't have. The passport was similar, high-quality fake, good enough for most purposes, but detectable under proper scrutiny. The bank had failed to apply proper scrutiny. They'd seen a handsome young man with military identification claiming his deceased veteran status, and they'd processed the transaction with minimal questions. But the birth certificate was different. The birth certificate was real. "This is an actual certified copy," the forensic analyst told Morrison. "Issued by the Virginia Bureau of Vital Statistics 6 weeks ago." "How is that possible?" "Michael Hartwell is dead. His death is on record." Someone requested a replacement birth certificate using information available through public records. His birth date, mother's maiden name, hospital of birth, all of it's accessible if you know where to look. And the state just issued it? Birth certificates are replaced all the time for legitimate reasons. Lost documents, legal name changes, passport applications. The system doesn't automatically cross-reference death records. I listened to this explanation in the conference room where they'd set up the investigation, understanding for the first time how this had happened. My son's birth was a matter of public record. His death was in a different database. The two systems didn't talk to each other. Someone had exploited that gap. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. The Army Criminal Investigation Division had been monitoring identity theft cases involving deceased service members, a problem that had been growing since digital records made personal information more accessible. Michael's case matched a pattern they'd been tracking. "We've seen 7 similar cases in the past 18 months, the CID agent told us during a joint briefing. Deceased soldiers whose identities were used for financial fraud. Same methodology, obtain birth certificate, use it to get replacement documents, target family members or government benefits." Who's doing this? We believe it's a network, not individuals. Someone with access to military casualty records is identifying targets and selling that information to identity theft rings. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Someone within the military was betraying fallen soldiers by selling their identities to criminals. The investigation turned toward the source. CID traced the pattern of compromised identities back through channels, looking for common access points. All 7 victims had been processed through the same casualty notification office during their deaths, a coincidence too specific to be random. The suspect was a civilian contractor named Gerald Pruitt, who'd worked in administrative support for the Army's Casualty Affairs Division for 6 years. 6 years of access to the most sensitive information about America's fallen heroes. 6 years of selling that access to the highest bidder. Pruitt was arrested at his home in suburban Virginia. The search of his property revealed records of over 40 compromised identities, soldiers killed in action whose information he de-harvested and sold. Bank accounts, credit applications, tax fraud, benefit claims. The scope of the operation was staggering. The money from my accounts had already been moved through multiple transfers, much of it laundered into cryptocurrency and offshore accounts. Recovery would be difficult, possibly impossible. But Pruitt had records. Names of everyone he'd sold to. Details of every transaction. Including the man who'd walked into my bank pretending to be Michael. His name was Derek Simmons, a career criminal with a history of fraud and identity theft. He'd purchased Michael's identity from Pruitt for $5,000, then used it to steal $412,847 from me, a return on investment that explained why this criminal enterprise had thrived. Simmons was arrested in Florida, where he'd been living under yet another assumed identity. The physical resemblance to Michael that had made him suitable for the impersonation was apparently coincidental. Pruitt had matched him with Michael's profile specifically because the surface similarities would help him pass initial scrutiny. "He knew everything about your son," Morrison told me. "His service record, his deployment history, the names of his childhood friends, his favorite sports teams. Pruitt's files were comprehensive. How could someone do this? These men died serving their country, and I can't explain the mentality, Mrs. Hartwell. I can only tell you that he'll spend a very long time in prison." The trial was federal, given the scope of the crimes. Gerald Pruitt faced charges including wire fraud, identity theft, theft of government property, and conspiracy, counts that carried combined potential sentences of over 40 years. Derek Simmons faced similar charges for his role in executing the frauds. I testified at both trials. Not because my testimony was legally necessary, the evidence was overwhelming, but because I needed to face them. Needed them to see me. Needed the jury to understand that these weren't abstract crimes against numbers and systems. These were crimes against mothers. Against families. Against the memory of young men and women who'd given everything for their country. My testimony at Pruitt's trial was the hardest thing I'd done since Michael's funeral. My son was 24 years old, I told the jury. He enlisted at 18 because he believed in something larger than himself. He deployed 3 times. He earned a Bronze Star for valor. And he died on a road in Kandahar province, protecting soldiers under his command. The courtroom was silent. I visit his grave every month. I touch his headstone and tell him about the world he's missing. I keep his room exactly as he left it, because changing it feels like betraying him. Pruitt sat at the defense table, refusing to meet my eyes. That man, I pointed at him, took my son's identity and sold it. He took the name Michael earned through sacrifice and used it to steal from me, his own mother. He didn't just take my money. He desecrated my son's memory. He made my child into a tool for criminals. I turned to face Pruitt directly. You sat in an office handling the records of America's fallen heroes. You knew their names, their families, their sacrifices. And you sold them. Every single one. I waited until he finally looked at me. My son died with honor. You'll die in prison with nothing but shame. Remember that. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing, 32 years federal imprisonment, no possibility of parole. Derek Simmons received 18 years at his subsequent trial. The judge in Pruitt's case made rare comments from the bench. The defendant exploited his position of trust to victimize America's most honored dead. His crimes are not merely financial, they are moral offenses against the fabric of military service and sacrifice. This court can impose no punishment commensurate with his betrayal. I sat in the gallery and felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction, but exhaustion. The trial was over. The criminals were convicted. Justice, such as it was, had been served. But Michael was still dead. And my money was still gone. The recovery process was slow and incomplete. The bank, facing potential liability for their failure to properly verify the withdrawal, eventually agreed to a settlement that returned approximately $340,000 of my stolen funds. The remaining $72,000 had vanished into cryptocurrency wallets and offshore accounts that law enforcement couldn't access. The settlement included no admission of fault. Banks never admit fault, but they also implemented new verification procedures for transactions involving deceased account holders. My case had exposed a systemic vulnerability. At least something might prevent other families from experiencing what I had. I received an unexpected letter 6 months after the trials concluded. It was from the mother of another soldier whose identity Pruitt had sold, a woman named Margaret Okonkwo from Chicago, whose son had been killed in Iraq in 2019. I read about your testimony, she wrote. About what you said to Pruitt in the courtroom. I wanted you to know that it helped me. Knowing another mother had faced them, had spoken the truth, had refused to be silent, it made me feel less alone. She'd been victimized differently. Her son's identity had been used for tax fraud rather than direct theft, but the wound was the same. We began corresponding. Then talking on the phone. Eventually, we met in person. Margaret introduced me to other families she'd connected with. Soon, there were 7 of us, the families of the 7 soldiers whose identities had been part of the pattern CID identified. 7 mothers and fathers and siblings, bound together by shared grief and shared violation. We formed an advocacy group. Called it Honor Protected, a name that captured both what had been violated and what we intended to defend. Our mission was simple: push for systemic changes that would prevent identity theft targeting deceased service members. We lobbied for legislation requiring automatic notification between death record systems and vital statistics offices. We worked with military advocates to improve protections for casualty records. We testified before congressional committees about our experiences. The Gerald Pruitt case had exposed a vulnerability, but vulnerability wasn't the same as solution. Converting awareness into actual protection required sustained pressure. The Michael Hartwell Memorial Act was introduced 2 years after my testimony. Named for my son, the first victim in the investigation that brought down Pruitt's network, the bill required cross-referencing of death records before issuing replacement identity documents for any individual whose information appeared in military databases. It wasn't a perfect solution. Identity thieves would adapt, find new vulnerabilities. But it was something. A door closed. A protection erected. The bill passed with bipartisan support. Senators and representatives who rarely agreed on anything found common ground in protecting the identities of fallen soldiers. I attended the signing ceremony at the White House. The president mentioned Michael by name. Called him a hero whose sacrifice had extended beyond his death, whose mother's advocacy had created lasting protection for military families. I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired, and grief-worn, and grateful that something meaningful had emerged from violation. I still visit Michael's grave every month. Section 60, Row 14, Arlington National Cemetery. The headstone that bears his name, his rank, his dates of birth and death, and the bronze star that marks his valor. I tell him about my life. About the advocacy work. About the laws that bear his name. About the mothers I've met who understand what I've lost. I tell him I love him. That I miss him. That I'll see him again someday. And I tell him that his name is protected now. That no one else will steal what he earned through sacrifice. Your son withdrew your life savings this morning. The bank manager's words had shattered my world for the second time. But from that shattering, something emerged. Not just justice for the criminals, though they're both rotting in prison where they belong. Not just recovery of most of my funds, though that security matters. What emerged was purpose. I couldn't bring Michael back. Couldn't undo his death or fill the void his absence created. But I could ensure that his name, and the names of other fallen soldiers, would be protected from those who would exploit their sacrifice. Grief had taught me to keep moving, to get up even when staying down felt easier. Advocacy gave me somewhere to go. Michael was 24 when he died. He believed in service, in protection, in defending people who couldn't defend themselves. The man who stole his identity thought he was stealing from a dead soldier who could fight back. He forgot that dead soldiers have mothers. And this mother fought back with everything she had.